Emma Whitaker pressed the letter against her chest and squeezed her eyes shut. Not because the words hurt her, but because she couldn't read a single one of them. Her hands were shaking. Her jaw was tight. And the man standing across that kitchen counter was waiting for an answer she didn't have. She had survived drought, hunger, and loneliness. But this one moment felt like the end of everything. If you've ever hidden a secret that made you feel less than you were, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel. Follow Emma's story all the way to the end and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. The summer of 1878 did not arrive gently in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana. It came hard and fast, the way most things did out west, without warning, without apology, and without mercy for anyone foolish enough to be caught unprepared. The grasses along the creek beds had burned from green to gold before June was even halfway done. The air smelled of dry earth and pine resin and something faintly metallic, the way the land always smelled right before it decided to test a person. Emma Whitaker had been tested plenty. She arrived at the Dawson Ranch on a Tuesday morning, carrying a small wooden suitcase that had seen better decades and wearing a dark brown dress that had been mended so many times, the stitching told its own story. She was 26 years old, but the set of her jaw and the steadiness of her gaze belonged to a woman who had carried twice that many years in her chest. She came because of an advertisement. She had not read the advertisement herself. She never read anything herself. A kind woman at the general store in Billings. A Mrs. Pruitt, round-faced and soft-voiced, had read it aloud to her, while Emma stood very still and kept her expression carefully neutral, the way she always did when someone else's eyes moved across a page and hers could only watch. Ranch help needed. Bitterroot Valley. Cooking, cleaning, general upkeep. Fair wages. Inquire at the Dawson property 12 miles north of Harlow Creek. Emma had listened to every word. She had tucked each one away in the sharp, reliable memory she had spent a lifetime sharpening precisely because she had nothing else to rely on. She could not read, but she could remember. Lord, could she remember. She remembered the way Mrs. Pruitt's voice rose slightly on the word fair. She remembered thinking that fair was a word that didn't mean the same thing to everyone. She remembered deciding it didn't matter, because 12 miles north of Harlow Creek was 12 miles away from the dried-up farm in Missouri, where she had nothing left, and right now, distance was the only currency she could afford. So she came. She walked the last 4 miles after the wagon she'd hitched a ride on, turned off at a different fork, and she arrived at Caleb Dawson's ranch with dust on her boots, and her chin lifted, and her heart hammering quietly behind her ribs in the way it always did when she was about to step into something she couldn't fully see. The ranch was larger than she'd expected. Not grand, not in the showy way of men who wanted everyone to know they had money, but solid, built to last. The kind of place a man constructed with his own hands and his own time and no particular interest in what anyone else thought of it. There was a main cabin set back from a wide dirt yard, a barn off to the left, a separate cookhouse that still had smoke rising from its chimney, even in the July heat, and 3 smaller outbuildings she couldn't immediately identify. A well-used fence line stretched in both directions, and beyond it, the valley rolled out wide and golden and quietly magnificent under the white summer sky. 2 horses stood near the far fence, their tails flicking slow and lazy against the heat. Emma stopped at the edge of the yard and took it all in. Then the cabin door opened, and Caleb Dawson stepped out onto the front porch. She had not known what to expect. The advertisement had given her nothing but practical information, and the man in front of her gave her something she hadn't prepared for either. He was tall, not dramatically. So, but the kind of tall that came with proportion, with a frame built for work and weather. Broad through the shoulders. Dark brown hair that curled slightly at the temples from the heat. A jaw shadowed with a few days' growth of beard, not careless, but unhurried. His eyes, when they found hers across the yard, were the color of creek water in the shade, dark and still, and harder to read than she would have liked. He wore a simple dark vest over a rolled-sleeve shirt, canvas trousers and boots that were clean, despite everything the land around them suggested about cleanliness being a low priority. He was not what she'd expected. She wasn't entirely sure what that meant yet. He came down off the porch steps and crossed the yard toward her unhurried, and he stopped at a polite distance and tipped his hat. "Miss," he said. His voice was low and level. "You hear about the position." "I am," Emma said. She kept her voice steady. She was good at that. "Name, Emma Whitaker, out of Missouri, most recently out of Billings." He nodded the way a man nods when he's filing information away, rather than reacting to it. "Caleb Dawson, this is my ranch." He paused. "Can you cook?" "Yes, sir." "Biscuits." "Biscuits, bread stew, roasted game salt pork, 3 ways apple preserves, if there's a tree nearby, and corn cake that won't make a man regret eating it." Something shifted very slightly at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't quite a smile. It was more like the shadow of one passing through on its way somewhere else. "Can you handle horses?" "Better than most men I've known," she said, "though I'd rather let the horse make that judgment." This time the shadow of a smile stayed a fraction of a second longer. "Fair enough. Cleaning, general upkeep, helping manage supplies." "Yes to all of it. I've got a ranch hand name of Hector comes by 3 days a week for the heavy outdoor work. The rest of the time it's just me and whatever the land decides to throw at the day. Positions, room and board, plus a fair wage like the advertisement said." He paused. "The work's honest. I don't expect more than that." Emma looked at him steadily. "Neither do I, Mr. Dawson." He studied her for a moment, not the way men sometimes looked at her, measuring and presuming and already reaching conclusions that had nothing to do with her actual capabilities. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he genuinely hasn't made up his mind about yet. "When can you start?" he asked. "I already have," she said. He blinked once. Then he turned and walked back toward the porch and said over his shoulder, "Cookhouse is through the yard. Supper's usually at 6. Emma picked up her suitcase and followed him. The first week was practical. Emma learned the rhythms of the ranch, the way she learned everything by watching, by asking precise questions when she had to, and by doing the work herself until her hands knew it without her mind having to intervene. The cookhouse was well stocked and cleanly organized, which told her something about Caleb Dawson that she filed away alongside everything else she noticed about him. Men who kept their kitchens ordered tended to keep other things ordered too: their debts, their word, their tempers. She rose before dawn. Each morning started the fire, had coffee and biscuits ready. By the time Caleb came in from his first check of the animals. She managed the pantry inventory by counting and pattern rather than labels. She knew a flour sack by its weight and texture, a salt barrel by the color of the wood canned goods, by the shape of the tins. She had been doing this her whole life. It was not struggle. It was simply the way she navigated a world built around words she couldn't access. The danger, as always, was other people noticing. Caleb Dawson, in that first week, did not notice. Or if he did, he said nothing. He was a man of comfortable silences. He didn't fill the air with conversation the way some men did, nervous, performative, always needing the room to know they were present. He spoke when he had something worth saying, and was quiet when he didn't, and Emma found to her faint surprise that his silences didn't press on her the way most people's did. Most people's silences asked questions. His just existed. She appreciated that more than she could have explained to anyone. It was on the 9th day that the trouble started. Not dramatic trouble. Not yet. Just the ordinary creeping kind that Emma had learned to dread precisely because it arrived so quietly. Caleb came into the cookhouse mid-morning, which was unusual. He was typically out on the far fence line or in the barn during those hours, and he was carrying a letter. He set it on the table in front of her. "Came in from town yesterday," he said. "Forgot to mention it. It's from the grain supplier about the fall order. I need someone to check the quantities against what I've got written in the supply ledger. Make sure the numbers match up before I send a reply." He set the ledger on the table alongside the letter. Emma looked at both of them. The letter was 2 pages covered in neat, close handwriting. The ledger was a thick brown book with columns of figures and words she recognized the shapes of but could not decode. She stood very still, her hands beneath the table where he couldn't see them pressed flat against her thighs. "I'll need a minute," she said. "Take your time," Caleb said, and walked back out. Emma stood alone in the cookhouse with the letter and the ledger and the particular quality of silence that falls on a person when they are facing something they cannot outrun. She picked up the letter. The handwriting was small and slanted. She could identify individual letters. Her years of careful observation had given her that much, but making them into words, into meaning, was beyond her. The letters slipped away from each other like water through a cupped hand. She set the letter down. She opened the ledger. The columns of figures were more manageable. Numbers were numbers. She had always been strong with numbers, could calculate in her head faster than most people could put pencil to paper. But the words beside the figures, the labels, the notations, those defeated her completely. She stood there for a long time. She could go out and tell him she didn't understand the handwriting. She had used that excuse before, and it worked, and it left her dignity mostly intact. Bad handwriting was a reasonable complaint. It was not a confession. She could say she'd left her spectacles in her room. She didn't own spectacles, but Caleb Dawson didn't know that yet. She was already reaching for an excuse when the cookhouse door opened again and Caleb stepped back in. He stopped when he saw her face. She had not controlled her expression fast enough. She knew it the moment she felt his eyes land on her, not with suspicion, not with judgment, but with something quieter and more unsettling. Concern. "Emma," he said carefully. "You all right?" And that was what undid her. Not cruelty, not mockery, not the kind of sharp-edged scrutiny she had spent 26 years protecting herself against. Just a simple, straightforward question, asked by a man who seemed to actually want to know the answer. Emma set the letter down on the table. She straightened her spine. She looked at him directly, because she was not a woman who looked away, even when what she was about to say felt like handing someone a blade and trusting them not to use it. "Mr. Dawson," she said, "I need to tell you something before this situation goes any further, and I need you to hear the whole of it before you make any decisions." He crossed his arms, not defensively, just the way a man stands when he's settling in to listen. "Go ahead." "I can cook," she said. "I can clean and manage a household and handle horses and keep accounts in my head and do any physical work this ranch requires of me. I am not lazy, and I am not careless, and I have never in my life taken something that wasn't mine to take." She paused. "But I never learned my letters," she said. "I cannot read. Not that letter, not that ledger, not a newspaper, not a sign on a storefront. I never had the chance to learn, and I have spent my whole life working around it, and I am very good at working around it." Her voice was level and clear, and cost her considerably more than it sounded like. "But you asked me to do something I cannot do, and I will not lie to you about what I can and cannot do, so there it is." The cookhouse was very quiet. The fire popped once in the stove. Outside, one of the horses made a soft sound against the fence. Caleb Dawson looked at her for a long moment without speaking. She held his gaze. She had expected she didn't know exactly what she had expected. Something that would hurt. Something that always came when she got to this part, the part where she said the true thing out loud and waited for the world to shift against her. "Emma," Caleb said at last. "Sir." "Is that all?" She blinked. Of all the things she had prepared herself to hear, those 3 words were not among them. I beg your pardon. Is that—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "Is that the thing you thought would get you sent off this ranch?" She stared at him. "It has before." "Ah." He nodded slowly, like a man who has just understood something he didn't fully grasp a moment ago. He looked at the letter on the table, and then at the ledger. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "I'll read it to you," he said. "You tell me if the numbers match what you've been counting in the stores." Emma did not move. "Mr. Dawson, the grain order is for 300 bushels of winter wheat and 150 of oats," he said, picking up the letter. "Does that match what you think we're going to need?" She was still staring at him. He looked up. "Emma." "Yes." "Does it match?" She made herself think. She had been in that pantry and storehouse every day for 9 days. She had counted and weighed and assessed with the automatic precision of a woman who had no other choice. "You'll need closer to 400 of the wheat," she said, "if the winter runs long, which this valley looks like it tends to do. And the oats are about right, but you're low on barley. That's not in the letter at all, and you'll want at least 80 bushels if you're planning to keep both horses through to spring on good feed." Caleb looked at her. Then he looked back at the letter. Then he picked up a pencil from beside the ledger and began making notes. 400 wheat, he said. 80 barley. Got it. Emma sat down slowly in the chair across from him. She wasn't entirely sure what had just happened. She wasn't entirely sure what kind of man did what he had just done. But her hands, when she pressed them together in her lap, had stopped shaking. July moved through the valley like something slow and deliberate, heavy with heat and golden light and the smell of dry grass turning at the end of its season. Emma settled into the work. She was good at settling, at making herself fit into the available space without drawing too much attention to the fitting. It was a skill she had developed young and refined over years of navigating a world not built for someone like her, and she deployed it now with the quiet efficiency of long practice. But something was different at the Dawson Ranch, and she was taking her time deciding what to do with that difference. Caleb Dawson did not treat her like a problem. He did not tiptoe around the things she had told him, did not make it a topic of conversation, did not check on her with the particular brand of careful kindness that was really just pity wearing a nicer coat. He simply worked alongside her. The ranch work, the supply calculations, the day-to-day decisions that kept the place running, and whenever a written thing came up, he handled it as if handling it were the most natural thing in the world, which for him presumably it was. He did not make her feel small. This was in Emma's experience rarer than water in a dry summer. She found herself watching him when she could do so without being obvious about it. He worked hard, genuinely hard, not performatively hard, not the kind of hard work that announces itself. He was up before her some mornings already out at the barn, by the time she got the fire started, and he came in at the end of the day with the honest tiredness of a man who had used himself up in good service of the land. He ate whatever she put in front of him without complaint and said thank you like he meant it, which some men forgot to mean after the first week. How was solitary, in a way that did not seem lonely, or rather that seemed like it had been lonely for a long time and had simply grown accustomed to itself. He had books. She noticed the books on the third day lined up along a shelf on the main cabin wall. She could see them through the open door when she passed. Maybe 20 volumes, some old and dark-spined, some newer, all of them, with the particular worn quality of things that had been touched and touched again. She did not ask about them, but she noticed them. It was a Friday evening, the kind that comes at the end of a long, hot week and settles over everything like a slow exhale. When Caleb appeared in the doorway of the cookhouse after supper was cleared and said, "Emma, can I show you something?" She looked up from wiping down the work table. "Is something wrong?" "No," he said. "Just something I thought you might. I wanted to show you something is all." She followed him across the yard to the main cabin, which she had not been inside before her work had kept her to the cookhouse and the outbuildings and her small room off the back of the cookhouse. He held the door open, and she stepped inside. It was simply furnished. A table, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, not lit in the summer heat. A narrow staircase. The shelf of books along the wall she had seen from outside. He crossed to a round table set near the window and lit the oil lamp sitting on it. Then he went to this bookshelf and ran his fingers along the spines slowly, the way a man moves through something familiar and dear. He pulled out a slim volume with a dark green cover and turned around. "My mother's," he said. "She had all of these. Read to me when I was small." He paused. When she passed, the house went quiet, stayed quiet a long time. Emma stood in the middle of the cabin and said nothing, because sometimes nothing was the right thing. "I can read them myself," he said. "I do sometimes, but it's not—" He stopped, started again. "It's different reading alone." He pulled out the chair near the lamp. "Sit down," he said quietly. "If you want to." She sat. He opened the book. And Caleb Dawson, rancher of the Bitterroot Valley, a man of comfortable silences and careful words, began to read aloud. His voice, Emma discovered, was different when he read. Still low, still measured, but with something in it she hadn't heard before, a warmth, an ease like watching a man move through country he had walked since childhood. She sat very still and listened. She did not understand every reference, She didn't have his reading history, didn't have the years of pages behind her eyes that he had. But the words came into the room like something alive, and the lamp threw its warm circle around both of them, and the summer night pressed dark and quiet against the cabin windows. She did not cry. She was not a woman who cried easily, and she was not about to start in someone else's cabin. But something in her chest went very soft, in the way that only happens when something you have wanted for a very long time arrives without warning and finds you completely unprepared. When he finished the chapter, he closed the book. He looked at her across the lamp. "You want to hear the next one tomorrow?" he asked. Emma looked at the closed book on his knee and thought about 26 years of walking past libraries and schoolhouses and printed signs, and feeling the specific weight of being locked outside something the rest of the world moved through freely. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." Caleb nodded and set the book on the table between them. "Then I'll be here," he said. What neither of them said that night, and what both of them carried back across the yard in the dark, Emma to her small room, Caleb to his quiet cabin, was that something had passed between them in that lamplight that had nothing to do with reading, and nothing to do with pity, and nothing to do with the ordinary transactions of employer and employee. Something had been offered. Something had been received. And in the Bitterroot Valley, in the summer of 1878, where the land was dry, and the work was hard, and the nights ran long and silent, that was not a small thing. That was not a small thing at all. Emma lay in her narrow bed and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling into the dark, the horses, the wind, the distant call of something wild and unhurried in the hills. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum, the way she did when she was trying to get a clear accounting of herself, the secret that had followed her from Missouri, that had followed her from every job she had ever held, that had sat in her chest like a stone. She'd grown so accustomed to, she sometimes forgot it was there. It was still there. It was always still there. But tonight, in this cabin, in this valley, with this man's voice still in the air around her, like the last of the lamplight, it had felt for the first time in 26 years, like something that did not have to be a wall. She did not know yet what else it might be. She thought she might wait to find out. The evening after Caleb read to her, Emma woke before dawn with a feeling she couldn't immediately name. It wasn't happiness exactly. Happiness was too simple a word for something this complicated, this cautious. It was more like the feeling of ground that had been frozen all winter, beginning very tentatively to thaw, the sense that something underneath was still alive, still capable of movement, even if it hadn't proven that yet. She got up, started the fire, put the coffee on, and when Caleb came in from the barn at his usual time and sat down at the cookhouse table with his usual quietness, she set a cup in front of him and said without planning to say it, "That story last night, the woman who went back to the house." He looked up. "Mrs. Etheridge. Was she real?" "No," he said. "It's a novel. Fiction." "She felt real." He wrapped both hands around the cup. "Good writing does that." Emma sat down across from him, something she didn't usually do during his morning coffee. Something that was a small departure from the careful professional distance she maintained, without quite deciding to maintain it. She sat down and she said, "I've never had anyone read to me before, not since I was very small. My mother used to before she got sick." Caleb looked at her steadily. "How old were you?" 7. He nodded, said nothing, didn't fill the space with false comfort, just nodded, which was the right response, which she was beginning to understand was something he did consistently, give the right response instead of the easy one. "After she got sick, there wasn't money for school," Emma said. "There was barely money for food. I worked the farm with my father and my brothers, and by the time things stabilized enough that school might have been possible again." She stopped. "I was 12, and 12-year-olds working a farm don't go back to school. They just keep working." "No," Caleb said quietly. "They don't." "I don't say it for pity," she said immediately. "I know you don't. I just—" She stopped again, pressed her hands flat on the table. "I wanted you to know why, in case you were wondering." "I wasn't wondering why," he said. "Some things don't need a reason to deserve understanding." Emma looked at him across the table. She had met a great many men in her 26 years. She had worked for several of them. She had navigated their expectations and their assumptions and their particular brands of condescension with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had no other option. She had not met one who said things like, "Some things don't need a reason to deserve understanding," and meant them without any evident awareness that he was saying something unusual. She picked up her own coffee. "What happened to your mother?" she asked. "If that's something you're willing to say." He was quiet for a moment. "Fever. Winter of '68. I was 19. He paused. "Father went the year before. Ranching accident." "You were alone at 19. "I had the ranch," he said. "And her books." Emma understood that. Not the books, she had never had books. But the idea of holding on to the thing that connected you to the person you lost, carrying it forward, because putting it down felt like losing them a second time. She understood that completely. "Then I'm glad she had good taste," Emma said. The shadow of a smile crossed his face again. Warmer this time. Less shadow, more smile. "She did," he said. He finished his coffee and stood up. "I'll be at the north fence most of the morning. Hector's coming in this afternoon to help with the hay storage. I'll have something ready for midday." He picked up his hat from the peg by the door. "Emma?" "Mr. Dawson." "If you want to hear the next chapter this evening, I'll be in after supper." She looked at him with her hands around her cup and her expression giving away considerably less than she felt. "I reckon I might be available," she said. The smile this time was real. He put his hat on and walked out into the morning. Emma sat alone in the cookhouse and listened to the sound of his boots crossing the yard, and she thought that the ground under her feet felt a little less frozen than it had yesterday. Just a little. But enough. The reading sessions became a nightly thing, without either of them formally deciding that was what they were doing. It happened the way some of the most significant things happen, incrementally, quietly. One small decision, layering on top of another until the accumulated weight of all those small decisions had built something neither of them had set out to build. Caleb finished the green-covered novel in 4 evenings. Then he went back to the shelf and spent a long time running his fingers along the spines before he pulled out another one, thicker this time, darker, with a cracked binding that spoke of heavy use. He sat down in his chair and opened it and said without preamble, "This one's longer, more complicated." Emma settled into her chair across the lamp. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He read. What shifted first was the quality of her listening. In the beginning, she had listened the way she had trained herself to listen to everything, attentively, precisely cataloging each piece of information as it arrived and filing it away in the meticulous internal library she had built over years of having no other kind. She listened for content. She listened for plot. She tracked characters and their relationships and the logic of what happened to them. But somewhere in the second week, something loosened. She stopped cataloging and started simply being in the story. She laughed once, surprised herself with it, a real laugh, quick and involuntary, at something a minor character said. She saw Caleb glance up from the page, and she felt heat rise in her face, and he looked back down without comment, but the corner of his mouth had moved, and she understood that the laugh had pleased him. She asked questions. This was the thing that surprised her most about herself. She had spent her whole life not asking questions that might reveal how much she didn't know. But in the lamplight of Caleb Dawson's cabin, she found herself asking them anyway, not out of carelessness, but because the answers were actually what she wanted, and he was actually the kind of person who gave answers without making the questioner feel small for needing them. "What does edifice mean?" He looked up. "A building. A large structure. Sometimes used for institutions. A church, a courthouse, something imposing." "Why not just say building?" "The author wants you to feel the weight of it. The permanence." She thought about that. Does one word really do all that? "A good word does more than you'd expect," he said, and went back to reading. She sat with that for a while. A good word does more than you'd expect. She had never been able to read, but she had always known that language was a kind of power. She had known it from the outside, the way you know a fire is warm by standing near it without being able to touch it. Caleb was the first person who had ever let her stand close enough to feel the heat directly. It was in the third week that he made the suggestion, and he made it so casually that she almost missed the significance of it. He had just finished a chapter and was marking the page when he said without looking up, "You know I could teach you." Emma went very still. "Teach me what?" "To read." He closed the book and set it on the table. "Start at the beginning. Letters, then sounds, then words." He finally looked up. "If you wanted." The air in the cabin was very close suddenly. Emma had a very specific response to the idea of learning to read. She had carried it for so long, it had calcified into something automatic. The response was too late, too slow, too humiliating, not for someone like you. It was the response of a woman who had seen what happened when she allowed herself to want things she couldn't have. The disappointment was worse than the wanting, and the wanting was already bad enough. "I'm 26, she said. "I know how old you are. People learn to read when they're children." "Some people," he said. "Not all people." "It would take time," he agreed. "Yes, time and patience, neither of which I'm short on." She looked at him. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. He turned the book over in his hands, looking at the cover. "Because you listen to these stories the way—" He stopped. Started again. "Because the way you listen, Emma, is the way someone listens who was made for this, who was supposed to have this, who just didn't get the chance." The words landed somewhere tender. She pressed her lips together. "I'm not a charity project, Mr. Dawson." "No," he said immediately and firmly, with the kind of certainty that left no room for argument. "You are not." "Then what am I?" He was quiet for a moment. "Someone who helped me figure out what's been wrong with the grain order for the last 3 seasons. A pause. "Someone who told me my barley stores were low before I made a costly mistake." Another pause. "Someone whose company I have found not burdensome." Not burdensome. It was not a declaration. It was not flowery or romantic or anything that would have made Emma suspicious of its sincerity. It was simply a plain statement from a plain-spoken man who chose his words carefully and meant the ones he chose. She thought about her father's voice at the kitchen table when she was young, saying her name. She thought about her mother reading to her by the firelight before the world got hard. She thought about 26 years of walking past schoolhouses and libraries and printed words and feeling the particular cold loneliness of a door that's always locked. She thought about Caleb's voice filling this cabin every night. "Start simple," she said at last. "If I'm going to do it, I want to start simple and build from there. No rushing." "No rushing," he agreed. "And if I say stop, we stop. And you won't treat me like—" She stopped. It was hard to say without it sounding like accusation, which she didn't mean as accusation, just as information. "You won't treat me like less than what I am if I'm slow." Caleb looked at her with his creek-water eyes and said, "Emma, I already know what you are. The letters are the only thing I don't know, and I figure that's more my loss than yours." The fire in the stove made a sound. Outside, the summer night was warm and dark and wide. Emma said, "All right, Mr. Dawson, teach me." The first lesson happened the next evening. Caleb brought out a piece of smooth paper and a pencil, and he wrote the alphabet in his steady, even hand. Capital and lowercase side by side. Each letter with the care of a man who understood that this particular paper mattered. Emma watched his hand move across the page. She had watched other people write before. She had spent decades watching other people write reading signs, filling out ledgers, writing letters, performing that casual daily miracle that the world demanded, and she had never been able to provide. She had watched with the careful neutrality of a woman who could not afford to let anyone see what it cost her to watch. Now she watched Caleb's hand move across the paper, and she felt something completely different. She felt like she was being led inside. "Start with A," he said. "I know the shapes," she said. "I've always known the shapes. I just can't. They don't turn into sounds for me on their own. I never had anyone tell me the rules." He stopped, looked at her. "You know the shapes." "I taught myself to recognize the letters. I can identify them all. I just can't. She gestured at the paper. Put them together. Make them say things. He stared at her for a long moment, and she saw him recalibrating, adjusting, understanding that he had made an assumption about where she was starting from, and that the starting point was further along than he'd thought. All right, he said. Then you already know more than you think. That's a generous way to put it. It's an accurate way to put it. Knowing the shapes is the hard part. The sounds, the combinations, that's learnable. That's rules and practice. He turned the paper toward her. Show me. Point to A. She pointed to it. B. She pointed to it. He went through the alphabet, and she pointed to every single letter without hesitation, quickly and precisely in order, and then out of order when he tested her. He watched her face as she did it. Emma, he said slowly. You've been doing this longer than I thought. I told you I worked around it. You didn't tell me you'd been doing it this well. He set down the pencil. How long? My whole life, she said. Signs, storefronts, newspapers, I learned the shapes of all of it because I had to. Because otherwise, how would I know which building was the post office and which was the general store? How would I know which can in the pantry was beans and which was tomatoes if I hadn't memorized the colors and the shapes of the labels? She looked at him steadily. When you can't read Mr. Dawson, you develop other ways of reading. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said quietly and sincerely, I didn't understand how much work that was. I should have, she shook her head. Most people don't. That's all right. It's not actually, he said. But I'll do better. She looked at him across the paper with the alphabet on it, with the lamp between them, with all of the summer night pressing warm against the cabin walls, and something in her chest adjusted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way a load shifts when someone reaches out a hand to share the carrying. A says ah, he said, and pointed to the letter. Like an apple. Apple. A, she said. Ah, apple. B says buh, he said. Like in barn. She looked at him. Barn. You live on one, he said. Might as well be useful. She felt her mouth move without entirely choosing to let it. Not quite a smile. The shadow of one passing through. Buh, she said. Barn. Keep going, he said. She kept going. The nights settled into a new rhythm after that. First, the reading, always the reading first, because the reading was the thing Emma had wanted before she knew she could ask for it, and Caleb seemed to understand without being told that it needed to come before the lesson. Rather than after that, she needed the pleasure of the story before she could sit comfortably with the work of the learning. He read a chapter. 2 chapters some nights. Then he closed the novel and moved to the paper, and the lesson began. They worked through sounds and combinations with the same methodical patience that Caleb brought to everything he did. Unhurried, undramatic, responsive to where she actually was, rather than where a textbook might expect her to be. He found quickly that Emma's memory was extraordinary. She could hear a rule once and apply it without needing to be reminded. He found that she learned fastest through practical examples, words she already knew, rather than abstract combinations on a page. She found that the rules, once she understood them, unlocked something in her that had been locked so long she had stopped believing there was anything behind the door. She read her first word on a Thursday. He had written barn on the paper. Slowly, each letter sounded aloud. B-buh, A-ah, R-ruh, N-nuh. Try it together, he said. She looked at the letters. She had been looking at the letters in isolation for so long, recognizing them, knowing their shapes and names, and now she was being asked to make them move together to let them speak to each other. She said, B-A-R-N. Pause. Barn. The word came out of her mouth already knowing what it meant, already connecting to the thing it described. The building across the yard, the horses in the stalls, the smell of hay and leather and animal warmth. She sat very still. That's right, Caleb said quietly. I know it's right, she said. I know what barn means. You just read it, he said. She looked at the paper, at the 4 letters that had just done something she had been told herself she was not capable of. Her throat felt tight. She was not going to cry in Caleb Dawson's cabin over a four-letter word. She was absolutely not going to do that. "Give me another one," she said, her voice perfectly level. He looked at her for just a moment, looked at her face, at the way she was holding herself, at the thing she was very carefully not letting show. And he turned to the paper and wrote another word. Home. Emma pressed her lips together. H. Huh? She said. Oh, she paused. M-E-E. She looked at the word. H-O-M-E. She frowned. That's not right. E at the end of a word is usually silent, he said. It changes the sound of the vowel before it. The O in home says O, not ah, because of the silent E. She stared at the word. That is a deeply unreasonable rule, she said. He laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh, a real one, full and unguarded, surprised out of him. It changed his face completely, made him look younger, made him look like the 19-year-old who had been left alone in this valley with his grief and his mother's books, and had built something solid and quiet out of both. It is, he agreed. English has many deeply unreasonable rules. Who decided these? Mostly people who'd been dead for centuries and never had to explain themselves. She looked at the word home on the paper. H-O-M, she said carefully. Home. Home, he said. She sat back in her chair and looked at the two words on the paper. Barn. Home. 2 words. 2 real words that she had taken off a page with her own eyes and her own mouth and her own mind. She had been doing sums her whole life that no one gave her credit for, counting and calculating and navigating a written world with nothing but her eyes and her memory and her sheer refusal to be defeated. She had been competent and capable and reliable in 100 ways that no one saw, because the one thing she couldn't do was the thing the world decided to look at. But she had just read 2 words. 2 words that she had read herself off a page in the lamplight of a Montana cabin on a warm Thursday night in July. All right, she said, keeping her voice very steady. What's next? She made Caleb laugh 3 more times that week. She didn't do it on purpose, or not entirely on purpose. It was more that she was becoming slightly less careful about letting him see how her mind worked, and her mind, when she let it be, itself had a dryness to it, a sharp and particular sense of the absurd that caught him off guard in ways she found she enjoyed. The second time was when she read the word rough and looked at him with an expression of genuine accusation and said, "You told me 2 vowels together make a long sound. You specifically told me that." Most of the time they do. Rough. R-O-U-G-H. That is 4 letters that should say ru-gi. That is not what that word says. English, he said gravely, is a complicated language. English, she said, is a language invented by people who enjoyed watching others suffer. He laughed until she could see the lines beside his eyes. The third time was when she correctly read the word. Magnificent stumbled through it, sound by sound, working out each piece until the whole assembled itself. And when she finally got it, she set down the paper and said to him with perfect composure, "I expect a raise." He stopped laughing long enough to say, "A raise for reading 1 word." That was 12 letters, she said. That was not 1 word's worth of effort. The 4th time she couldn't remember afterward exactly what she'd said, only that his laughter had started quiet and then overtaken him completely, and he'd had to set the book down, and she'd watched him and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt like herself, not the version of herself she maintained in public, careful, capable, contained. The actual self underneath that, the one that had been waiting. August arrived while Emma wasn't paying attention to the calendar. One morning she walked out of the cookhouse, and the morning air had a different quality. Still warm, still summer, but with something at the edges of it that hadn't been there in July. A hint of coolness that the valley was borrowing from what was coming. A suggestion of turning. She stood in the yard and breathed it in. Hector, the ranch hand, who came 3 days a week, was a broad, quiet man in his 40s with a graying mustache and eyes that missed very little. He had been politely and professionally incurious about Emma during the weeks they'd worked alongside each other, exchanging pleasantries and practical information, and nothing more personal than that. But on a Tuesday, in the first week of August, he found her in the cookhouse doorway during his midday break and said with the careful casualness of a man who has prepared his words, "You're good for him, you know." Emma looked up from the pot she was watching. "I beg your pardon, Caleb," Hector said. He came and leaned against the doorframe with his coffee cup. "I've worked this ranch 6 years, Miss Emma. 6 years since his last ranch hand before me left, and he stopped doing much of anything but work and sleep." He paused. "He laughs now." Emma kept her eyes on the pot. "I was always decent," Hector said. "Fair employer, not a hard man. But there's something," he seemed to search for the word, "still about a person when they've been alone too long, like still water." "All right, just stopped." "Mr. Dawson is his own man," Emma said carefully. "Whatever change you're seeing has nothing to do with me." Hector looked at her with the eyes that missed very little. "Miss Emma," he said pleasantly, "that is the least convincing thing you have said in the time I have known you." He finished his coffee and pushed off the doorframe and walked back out to the yard. Emma stared into the pot and refused to let what Hector had said rearrange anything inside her. She refused for approximately 2 hours. Then she gave it up as a failed project and let it rearrange what it wanted to rearrange. That evening, Caleb read to her from a novel about a woman who had crossed the Great Plains alone and built a homestead and then lost it in a single winter. It was a hard story, not gentle or redemptive in any easy sense, and Caleb read it the way he read everything fully, without editorial commentary, trusting the story to do what it was meant to do. Emma listened with both hands wrapped around her tea, completely still. When he finished the chapter, she said, "Did she ever get it back, the homestead?" "You'll have to wait for the next chapter." "That's a very unsatisfying answer." "It is," he agreed. He marked the page. "You did something interesting today." She looked at him. "What?" "You wrote your name." That morning, while he was out at the far fence, she had sat at the table in the cabin. He had told her to feel free to come and go from the cabin as she needed, and she had taken a piece of paper from the drawer and the pencil, and she had written slowly and carefully the letters of her own name, E-M-M-A. She had sounded each one as she made it. She had looked at the 4 letters when she was done, and understood. Truly understood, for the first time, what they meant. Not just as shapes she had seen on documents and ledgers, and the tag on her own suitcase, but as something she had built herself letter by letter out of sounds and intention. She had sat there for a long time looking at them. Then she had folded the paper and put it in her dress pocket and carried it with her through the rest of the day. "I won't apologize for going into the cabin," she said now. "I'm not asking you to. You said I could." "I know what I said, Emma." She looked at him. "I wrote it 4 times, she said. "The 4th time was the best. Still crooked, but I knew what I was making." Caleb looked at her across the lamp. "How did it feel?" he asked. She had been thinking about this all day. About how to describe the thing that had moved through her when she understood that those 4 letters were hers, made by her, meaning her, belonging to her in a way that no one could take back. "Like I'd been somewhere cold for a very long time," she said finally, and someone opened a door. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Then he said quietly, "That door was always yours, Emma. I just helped you find the handle." She looked at the book on his knee. She looked at the paper with the alphabet on the table between them. She looked at the lamp throwing its warm circle around the 2 of them in the summer dark. She thought about 26 years of cold. She thought about this ranch, this cabin, this man who said, "Is that all?" when she handed him the thing she'd been most afraid of. She thought about her name written in her own hand on a piece of paper folded in her pocket. She pressed her hand against the pocket and felt the paper there and said, "Read me the next chapter." Caleb opened the book, and the summer night settled around them warm and unhurried, full of the sounds of the valley, and the smell of dry grass, and the particular quiet of 2 people who had stopped pretending they were only doing this for practical reasons. Outside, the first suggestion of autumn was moving through the air, patient and inevitable, the way all changing seasons arrive. Not dramatically, not all at once, but present and already happening, whether either of them was ready for it or not. The paper with her name on it stayed in Emma's pocket for 11 days. She didn't take it out and look at it. She didn't need to. She could feel it there folded into a small rectangle against her hip. A quiet reminder that she had made something real out of nothing but her own effort and Caleb Dawson's patience. She carried it the way some women carried a lock of hair or a pressed flower. Something small, something proof. By the second week of August, she could read 23 words without help. Not 23 letters. 23 words. She kept a private count in her head, the way she had always kept counts in her head, the way she had tallied flour weights and grain prices and distances between towns since she was old enough to understand that her memory was the only ledger she could fully trust. 23 words. Barn, home, road, water, fire, horse, cold, warm, work, name, Emma, Caleb, sky, rain, door, light, hand, voice, book, year, late, safe, true. 23 words, and she knew every single one of them with the particular certainty of something earned rather than given. She was adding new ones every night. Caleb had moved them past the basic primer stage, which had lasted exactly 4 days before Emma's rate of acquisition made it redundant, and into a method he seemed to be developing as they went, reading a passage aloud, then asking her to identify words she recognized on the page, then teaching her the ones she didn't. It was not a method from any book. It was a method built entirely around how Emma's mind actually worked, which was fast, practical, associative, and profoundly uninterested in being talked down to. He had figured that out quickly. She respected him for it. One evening, she looked up from a page. She had been studying a full paragraph longer than anything she'd tried before, and said without looking up, "I think I got most of this." "Go ahead," he said. She read, slowly, not smoothly. She still stumbled on combinations that broke the rules. Still had to sound out longer words, piece by piece, still found silent letters, personally offensive, and said so whenever she encountered them. But she read. The sense of the paragraph moved through her in real time, not reconstructed afterward from memory, but actually happening, actually present, word, connecting to meaning. She finished and looked up. Caleb was watching her with an expression she had learned to read, not with letters, but with the older and more practiced skill of reading human faces, and what it said was something he hadn't put into words yet. "Well," she said. "You missed one word," he said. "Third sentence, reluctant. You said reluctant." "What's it actually say?" "Reluctant," he said. "Means unwilling, doing something but not wanting to." She looked back at the sentence. She walked with reluctant steps toward the house she had not seen in 12 years. She looked up. "That makes more sense." "It does. I should have gotten that from context." "You're learning," he said. "I know I'm learning," she said with a sharpness that was entirely affectionate, and both of them knew it. "I just prefer to get things right." "I know you do," he said, and the way he said it was not condescending and not particularly gentle. It was simply accurate. It was him saying a true thing about her because he had been paying attention. She looked back at the page. 24 words. The invitation from Clara Whitmore arrived on a Thursday. Emma knew it was an invitation because Caleb told her, not because she could read the envelope, though she could read the name on the front. Her own name, Miss E. Whitaker, in a handwriting that was careful and deliberate in the way of someone who wanted to make a specific impression. Caleb brought it in with the rest of the mail and set it on the cookhouse table in front of her and sat down. "Clara Whitmore," he said. "Her husband owns the Double Creek spread about 8 miles east. He and I went to school together back when there was a proper school here." He paused. She means well, I believe." Emma had heard pauses like that before. They were the pauses that meant the opposite of what they preceded. "She's hosting a gathering," Caleb said. "Late August at their property. Most of the Valley families will be there. She's invited you as—" He looked at the letter. "As my household staff." Emma kept her expression carefully neutral. "Household staff. That's what she writes." "I see. You don't have to go," he said immediately. It's not, I wouldn't expect you to attend something you didn't want to attend. Emma looked at the envelope with her name on it printed in that careful, deliberate hand, and thought about a woman who would invite the hired help to a gathering in a way that made very clear she was the hired help. What would you normally do? She asked. For this kind of gathering. Caleb looked faintly uncomfortable, which was the closest he came to looking uncomfortable. Attend. It's expected in this valley. Everyone knows everyone. Staying away reads as unfriendly. And if you go, Emma said, come with me, he said. And then quickly, not as household staff, as my household manager, which is accurate. You manage the ranch household. That's the most accurate description of what you do. Emma studied him. He met her eyes without looking away. All right, she said. I'll go. She did not let herself think too carefully about what it meant that he had corrected the framing. She was good at not thinking too carefully about certain things. It was a different kind of discipline from the one she applied to reading harder actually, because there were no rules to learn and no clear markers of progress. Just the ongoing project of not letting herself want something she wasn't certain she was allowed to want. She had been managing that project with what she considered reasonable success. She continued managing it. The gathering was set for the last Saturday of August, and the week leading up to it was warm and busy and on the surface no different from any other week on the ranch. Beneath the surface, Emma was paying a different quality of attention to everything. She noticed the way Caleb mentioned Clara Whitmore twice more in the days before the gathering, each time with that same careful pause, that same slight tension in the set of his jaw that he didn't seem aware of. She noticed that he cleaned his good boots 2 days before the gathering, which was not a thing he would normally do this far in advance. She noticed that he asked her casually, and only once, whether she had everything she needed for the occasion. She said yes. She had the dark dress she'd arrived in newly mended in the places it needed mending and pressed smooth with the iron from the stove. She had her hair done as neatly as she could manage. She had the particular preparation she had always done before walking into a room that might turn hostile, the internal setting of herself, the deliberate arrangement of her expression and her posture and her voice, into something that gave nothing away and defended everything underneath. She was very good at that preparation. She hoped she wouldn't need it. She suspected she might. The Whitmore property was larger than the Dawson ranch and arranged in a way that announced this fact without seeming to try, which was the most effective way to announce such things. There were already a dozen people in the yard when they arrived, men in their better coats and hats, women in their good dresses, children running the edges of the gathering in the particular chaos that children brought to any occasion. Someone had set up tables in the shade with food and drink. There was the sound of conversation and laughter and the efficient social machinery of a community that had been assembling and reassembling itself for years. Emma stepped down from the wagon and stood in the yard and felt every familiar thing she always felt in these moments. She felt the weight of what she didn't know. Not about the people she was quick with. People always had been, but about the written world that surrounded every social gathering. The hand-lettered signs, the printed pages that got passed around, the casual production of a letter or a notice or a bill of sale in the middle of conversation, the assumption that of course everyone could read it. She felt that weight. She adjusted it to a manageable position and walked beside Caleb into the gathering. Clara Whitmore found them within 2 minutes. She was a handsome woman in her mid-40s, dark-haired and sharp-eyed, dressed in a green that cost money and knew it. She moved through the gathering with the ease of a woman in her own territory, which she was. "Caleb," she said warmly, extending her hand. "It's been too long." Her eyes moved to Emma with a speed that missed nothing and a smoothness that tried to look like it had. "And this must be Miss Whitaker." "Mrs. Whitmore," Emma said. "We're so glad you could join us." Her smile was the kind that had been practiced. "Caleb's been keeping you to himself for weeks, it seems. We were beginning to wonder." "The ranch keeps its own schedule," Caleb said pleasantly. "Not much room for social calls in July." Of course. Clara touched Emma's arm briefly, a gesture that managed to feel both welcoming and assessing. "Come and meet everyone. We're practically family out here in the valley. You'll want to know all of them." Emma followed her into the gathering. She met people whose names she filed away efficiently. She shook hands and answered questions, and said the right things in the right register. She had learned long ago how to move through a social occasion on observation and instinct alone. She was funny when funny was appropriate, and reserved when reserved was appropriate. And she watched how Caleb moved through the same room and noted that he was well-liked here. Genuinely well-liked in the way of someone people had known long enough to trust. She noticed Clara watching her. Not obviously, not with hostility exactly, but with the particular attention of a woman who was cataloging information about another woman and drawing conclusions from it. Emma noted it and filed it and moved through the gathering and waited. She didn't have to wait long. It happened an hour into the afternoon, when the initial energy of arrivals had settled and people had fallen into smaller groups, and the day had taken on the comfortable looseness of a gathering that was going well. Clara had gathered a small circle, 4 women, including Emma, plus a younger woman. Emma hadn't been introduced to who had the nervous eyes of someone who deferred to Clara reflexively. Clara was talking about the upcoming fall, about news from the city, about a letter she'd received from her sister in Denver. Then she produced the letter. "Oh, I should read you what she says about the theater season," Clara said, unfolding the pages. "It's absolutely, but wait, I should..." She looked around the circle with a smile. "Emma, since you're newest among us, would you read the passage, 3rd paragraph on the 2nd page?" She held the letter out to Emma. The circle of women looked at Emma pleasantly attentively, in the way of people waiting for something ordinary to happen. The letter shook very slightly in Clara Whitmore's hand as she extended it, and Emma understood with absolute clarity that this was not an accident. Clara Whitmore knew. Emma did not know how. A word from someone in Billings, perhaps. Or simply the careful social intelligence of a woman who had been watching and drawing conclusions all afternoon. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that the letter was extended, and the circle was watching, and the moment was here, the specific moment Emma had been preparing for her entire adult life, and had never been fully prepared for. She looked at the letter. She felt the paper in her pocket, her name written in her own hand. She felt 26 years of this moment, all the versions of it she had navigated and survived and carried forward. She took the letter. She looked at it. The handwriting was cursive and flowing and fast, not the careful printed letters Caleb wrote for her lessons. This was a different creature, entirely connected and slanted, and full of the shorthand of someone writing quickly to a person who knew them well. Emma could identify individual letters. She could not, with any reliability, make this into words. The world in the circle was very quiet. "Clara." Caleb's voice came from directly behind Emma. She had not heard him approach. "Clara," he said again, and something in his tone made all 4 women look at him, and Emma felt him move to stand beside her. Not in front of her, not between her and Clara, but beside her, which was a different thing entirely, and mattered completely. "I believe you were going to show everyone that photograph your sister sent, the one from Denver." Clara blinked. Her composure did not crack. She was too practiced for that, but it shifted. "I was just asking Emma to..." "Emma's been managing my ranch accounts all month," Caleb said pleasantly. "I'd hate to tire her eyes out on social correspondence when she's got numbers to run tomorrow." He reached past Emma and gently took the letter from her hand. "I'll read it if you like. Where's the passage?" Clara looked at him. He looked back. Something passed between them that Emma could not entirely read. Some history, some knowledge, some specific understanding that existed between 2 people who had occupied the same valley for decades and knew each other better than either would admit. Clara's chin lifted very slightly. "3rd paragraph," she said. 2nd page. Caleb found the passage and read it. He read it well, clearly, with the ease of a man entirely comfortable with words on a page, and the circle of women returned to pleasant attention. And the moment passed, and the gathering resumed its comfortable looseness. But Emma stood in the middle of it, with the blood very loud in her ears. Because what had just happened was that Caleb Dawson had seen what was coming before it arrived, had positioned himself, had moved with the specific intention of standing beside her before she had to stand alone. And the thing about that, the thing. Emma had to work very hard not to let herself feel too fully, too quickly, in the middle of Clara Whitmore's gathering with all these Valley people around her, was that he had not done it by removing her from the situation. He had not steered her away, had not made an excuse to leave, had not quietly maneuvered the afternoon so that the moment never happened. He had stood beside her. That was the difference. That was the thing Emma had never had before. They were in the wagon on the way back to the ranch before either of them spoke about it. The afternoon was going golden around the edges, the heat beginning to release from the day, and Emma sat beside Caleb on the wagon bench and watched the road and thought about the geometry of what it meant when someone chose to stand beside you instead of in front of you. "You knew," she said, "before she handed me the letter." "I had a guess," he said. "A guess. Clara is—" He paused. His jaw moved. "She's a woman who likes to understand the order of things. Who belongs where, who is what. She saw you in her gathering, and she wanted to understand what you were. And she found a way to find out." "She thought she did," he said. Emma looked at the road ahead of them. "She might have been right," she said. "If you hadn't, Emma. I'm not saying it to upset you. I'm saying what's true." "What's true?" he said with a quiet firmness that wasn't anger, but was something close to its principled cousin, "is that what Clara did was unkind, and I won't dress it up as something else." Emma sat with that. "I've had worse," she said. "I know you have," he said. "That doesn't make it right." She looked at him. His face was forward on the road, but his hands on the reins had the particular tension of a man working something through. "Why do you care?" she said, not accusatorially, genuinely. He was quiet for a long moment. "Because I know what it feels like," he said finally, "to carry something you didn't ask to carry, and to have someone use it against you." She waited. He didn't elaborate. And she understood the same way she understood most things about this man. That elaboration was not what she was going to get tonight, and that what she had gotten was more than he gave most people. "Thank you," she said, "for standing where you stood. Don't thank me for that. I'll thank you for what I decide to thank you for." The shadow of a smile crossed his face. The horses moved. The road unrolled ahead of them in the early evening gold. "Next time," Emma said, "let me handle it." He glanced at her. "I mean it," she said. "Next time something like that comes up, let me handle it. I've been handling things like that my whole life. I don't need protecting." He looked at her for a moment, reading her face with the same care and attention he gave to the pages of his mother's books. "All right," he said. "I'm not angry at you," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not angry at you." "I know. I just need you to understand that I can stand on my own ground." "Emma," he said, "I know that. I've known that since you showed up at my ranch with that suitcase and told me you'd already started." She looked at him. "I was watching the road again." She looked at the road too. "Read me something good tonight," she said. "Something with some fight in it." "I know just the chapter," he said. But that night, Caleb didn't immediately reach for the book. He sat down at the table and looked at the lamp for a moment, and Emma could see him deciding something, working something toward the front of himself that he usually kept further back. "My father couldn't do numbers," he said. Emma looked up from her tea. "I was a smart man," Caleb said. "Practical, hardworking, knew this land better than anyone I've ever met. But figures on a page." He shook his head. "He'd lose them. Add them up different every time. It wasn't stupidity. His mind just didn't hold them the same way other minds did." "What happened?" Emma said. "He made an error in a land contract, miscalculated an acreage figure." Caleb's hands were flat on the table. "The man he was dealing with knew my father would miss it and let it stand. My father signed something he didn't fully understand, and it cost him a third of the original property line. Before he bought this ranch, the property he came west with, the first one," he paused. "He got the land back eventually. It took years and a lawyer from Billings, but he got it back. But I watched my father sign that contract, and I was 16 years old, and I didn't understand yet what had happened. I didn't understand until later what it meant to have something used against you that way. A thing that isn't your fault. A gap that someone else sees before you can close it." Emma set down her tea. I'm not telling you this to compare, he said quickly. I'm not saying it's the same. I know it's not the same. I know you're not, she said. I'm telling you because... He stopped, picked up a pencil from the table, and turned it in his fingers, not writing, just moving. Because this afternoon, watching Clara Whitmore do what she did, I felt 16 years old again for about 30 seconds. I felt it in my body before I understood it in my head. He set down the pencil. And I thought you should know that my interest in what happens to you is not pity. It was never pity. The lamp between them burned steady and quiet. Emma felt the paper with her name on it in her pocket. Caleb, she said. Emma. I know it wasn't pity, she said. I knew that before tonight. He looked at her. I was waiting for you to know it too, she said. Something shifted in his face, not dramatically, not with any of the theatrical weight of a moment that knows itself to be significant. Just a quiet settling. A man arriving somewhere he'd been approaching for a long time. He picked up the book from the table. Chapter 9, he said. There's a woman in this chapter who does not take anything lying down. Then she and I will get along fine, Emma said. He opened the book and began to read. The next morning, Clara Whitmore's carriage appeared in the ranch yard. Emma saw it from the cookhouse window, the fine carriage, the matched horses. Clara herself stepping down in a rust-colored dress, with her face arranged in the particular expression of a woman who has decided to do something and intends to see it through. Emma did not go to the window. She moved to the cookhouse door and opened it, and stood in the doorway and waited. Caleb came out of this barn at the same moment, wiping his hands on a cloth, and the three of them arrived at the middle of the yard at approximately the same time. Clara looked between them. Caleb, she said. Then, Miss Whitaker. Mrs. Whitmore, Emma said. Clara clasped her hands in front of her. I wanted to apologize, she said, and whatever Emma had expected, that was not it. What I did yesterday was unkind, and I've been up half the night knowing it, and I am not a woman who does well with knowing I've been unkind. Emma looked at her. Clara met her eyes directly. I'd heard someone in Billings mentioned, I thought. She stopped, composed herself. It doesn't matter what I thought. What I did was put you in a position designed to embarrass you, and that was wrong, and I'm sorry for it. The yard was quiet. Caleb had gone still with the particular stillness of a man who is watching something unfold, and has decided his role in it is to stay out of the way. Emma looked at Clara Whitmore, at the rust-colored dress, and the practiced composure, and the genuinely uncomfortable honesty, currently disrupting both, and she made a decision. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, I accept your apology. Clara let out a small breath. And I'll tell you something else, Emma said. I've been learning to read. I'm not where you'd expect a woman my age to be, and I don't expect to pretend otherwise. But I'm learning, and I intend to keep learning, and in another few months, I expect I'll be able to read your sister's letter from Denver without anyone's help. Clara stared at her. I'm telling you because I suspect word travels in this valley, Emma said, and I'd rather it travel accurately. I'm not a secret, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm just a woman who didn't get the same start most people got. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My daughter couldn't do sums until she was 12. Her teacher told me she'd never manage household accounts. A pause. She runs the books for our entire property now. Emma held her gaze. Then she and I have something in common. Something shifted in Clara's face. Not a full softening, but a crack in the careful social arrangement she wore. Something more real coming through it. I hope you'll come to the next gathering, Clara said. Of your own account, Miss Whitaker. Not as household anything. Emma looked at her steadily. We'll see, she said, which was not a yes and was not a no, and was the most honest answer she had. Clara nodded, looked at Caleb briefly, looked back at Emma. Good morning then, she said, and returned to her carriage. They watched it roll back down the road. Caleb waited until it was out of sight, then turned to look at Emma with that expression she had learned to read without letters, the one that said he was trying not to let on how much something had affected him and was only partially succeeding. I told you to let me handle it, Emma said. You did, he agreed. Well, she said. Well, he said. You handled it. She turned back to the cookhouse. Coffee's on, she said. Come in when you're done staring after that carriage. I'm not staring. Caleb. Yes. Come inside. He came inside. 3 days later, Emma read her first full page. It was from one of Caleb's mother's books, not the novel they were working through together, but a slimmer volume he hadn't shown her before, one he brought out on a Tuesday evening, with a look that was somewhere between careful and deliberate. He set it in front of her without explanation. She looked at the page. The font was larger than the novel's, the language plainer. She recognized the shape of the text, immediately simple sentences, not overladen with the subordinate clauses and elevated vocabulary that made their current novel challenging. Try, he said. She looked at the first line. She looked at it for a long moment, assembling the pieces the way she had learned to, not rushing the sounds together before she had them right, not guessing based on context before she had actually read the letters. The woman stood at the door, she read. Her voice came out low and careful. The words came out right. She kept going. She had been standing at the door for a long... She stopped. Long, he confirmed. For a long time. Not because she could not. She stopped again. Open it, he said. Not because she could not open it, but because she was trying to remember. She stopped, worked the word. Remember. What was on the other side? She looked up. Caleb was looking at her with an expression she had no defenses prepared for. She looked back down at the page. She remembered. Emma read, her voice steadier now, finding a rhythm. It was home. It had always been home. She had simply forgotten that she was allowed to go back. She stopped. The cabin was completely quiet. Outside, a wind moved through the valley, warm still, but edged with the coming autumn, carrying the smell of changed things. Emma sat with her hands flat on the open book and felt the words she had just read moving through her the way only true things move, not loud, not dramatic, but all the way through, finding every hollow place and settling into it. She had read a page. A full page. With her own eyes, her own voice, her own hard-won understanding of the rules that had been kept from her for 26 years. She had read it, and it had said something true. Caleb, she said. Emma. Who wrote this? A pause. My mother, he said. She kept journals. I should have shown you sooner. He stopped. I wasn't sure I was ready. Emma looked at the page in her mother's handwriting. His mother's handwriting. She corrected herself. This woman she had never met. This woman who had read to her son by candlelight and left him a shelf of books and a cabin that had been silent too long. She turned to the next page. Read me what she wrote next, Emma said. Caleb reached over and turned back one page to the page Emma had just read. You read it, he said quietly. You read it to me. Emma looked at him. He looked at her. She looked back at the page. She began again from the beginning, reading his mother's words aloud in the cabin. His mother had loved with the autumn wind pressing against the windows and the lamp burning steady between them. And Caleb Dawson sat very still and listened to his mother's voice come back into the house. I didn't say a word until she finished. And when she finished, he said, "Thank you," in a voice that was entirely different from his usual voice, smaller, quieter, stripped of the careful control he typically maintained. Emma closed the journal gently. She thought about the letter she had been carrying in her pocket, the one she could now read. She thought about Clara Whitmore's carriage in the yard, and the apology that had surprised her, and the conversation that had followed it. She thought about standing in a circle of women with a letter in her hands, and the specific terror of that moment, and how she had survived it, the way she had survived every version of it before, by not breaking. She thought about what it meant that she had just read his mother's words back to him. She thought that maybe some doors once opened changed the shape of everything on both sides. Same time tomorrow, she said. Caleb looked at the journal in her hands. Same time tomorrow, he said. September came in like a quiet reckoning, not dramatic. Not the way the summer had been all heat and urgency, and the particular electricity of two people discovering each other across a lamplit table. September came in soft and certain, the way things come when they have already decided and are simply waiting for you to catch up. Emma noticed it in the quality of the morning air first, then in the way the ranch settled into a different rhythm, less frantic, more deliberate. The work shifted. The days shortened. And something between her and Caleb Dawson shifted too, in the way of things that have been building so gradually, you don't notice the weight until you put it down. She was reading 2 pages a night now, sometimes 3. Not perfectly. Not without pauses, without stumbles, without the occasional word that required her to stop and work it out, sound by sound, while Caleb waited with a patience that never once felt like waiting. But she was reading. Every night she was reading, and every night what she could do was more than what she could do the night before, and the accumulation of that, of each small forward movement stacking on the one before, had begun to feel less like learning and more like becoming. She was becoming something she had always been, but had never been allowed to be. That was the only way she could describe it to herself in the private language of her own thinking. She wasn't changing. She was arriving. On the 5th of September, she read aloud from the novel without stopping once for help. A full chapter. 14 pages. His mother's handwriting in the margins beside some passages, small notations, reactions, the evidence of a mind engaging with what it read. Emma noticed them as she went and said nothing about them, but she felt them, the ghost of another woman's reading alongside her own. When she finished the chapter, she closed the book and set it on the table. Caleb said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "My mother would have liked you." Emma kept her hands flat on the closed book. "You say that like you're sure," she said. "I am sure," he said. She had no patience for people who quit, and a great deal of patience for people who didn't. Emma looked at the cover of the book. "What was her name?" "Margaret," he said. "Margaret Ellen Dawson. She went by Maggie until my father died, and then she said Margaret felt more like herself. I never fully understood that until I was older. Grief changes the shape of you," Emma said. "What you answer to changes with it." He looked at her. "Yes," he said quietly. "It does." She pushed the book back across the table toward him. "Same chapter tomorrow," she said. "I want to do it again without stopping." "You didn't stop tonight." I hesitated on precarious for 4 seconds. "That's not good enough." His mouth moved. "Most people don't know what precarious means." "I know what it means now," she said. "Precarious. Dangerously unstable. Liable to fall." She met his eyes. "That's an important word to know out west." "It is," he agreed. She stood up, and he stood up, and they did the thing they had been doing for weeks, the end of evening accounting. The brief pause before she crossed the yard to her room. Both of them standing on the edge of something neither of them had named yet, and both of them aware of it. "Good night, Caleb," she said. "Good night, Emma," he said. She walked across the yard. She did not look back. But she knew the way she knew most things, by the particular quality of the air and the way her own body felt inside it, that he stood there and watched until she was inside. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Not a letter from town, not a supply order, not the ordinary mail that passed through the ranch with its routine weight and ordinary purpose. This letter was different. Emma knew it was different from the moment she saw it, because of where she found it, not in the stack of mail Caleb brought in from his weekly town run, but tucked into the inner pocket of her own wooden suitcase, which she had not opened fully in months. She found it while looking for a spool of thread. She pulled out the suitcase from under her bed and opened it, and there between the folded spare dress and the small tin where she kept her mother's thimble was an envelope she recognized without being able to explain how. She had felt it before, had known it was there, had for reasons she had never fully examined carried it from Missouri to Billings to this ranch in the Bitterroot Valley without ever doing what would have been necessary to know what was in it, because what was in it required reading. The envelope was old. The paper had gone soft with age and handling. She had handled it enough times just by holding it without opening it, pressing it between her palms in the dark on the worst nights when the particular loneliness of her situation became loud enough to need something to hold on to. It was from her father. She knew because she had asked Mrs. Pruitt in Billings, the same kind woman who had read her the ranch advertisement, to tell her that much. Just who it was from. She had needed to know that much before she could decide to keep carrying it. Her father had been dead for 2 years. The letter had found her 3 months after his death, forwarded through 2 different addresses, arriving finally at a boarding house in Kansas City, where she'd been working for 6 months. She'd been holding it ever since. She sat on the edge of her bed with the letter in her hands. She thought about what Caleb had told her his father's land contract had cost him. She thought about his mother's journals, with the notations in the margins. She thought about 14 pages, read aloud without stopping. She thought about the word precarious and what it meant. She thought about 26 years of a door that was locked. She turned the envelope over. She looked at the flap. She opened it. The paper inside was folded in thirds, written in her father's hand. She knew his handwriting by the shape of it, the particular way he formed certain letters, even though she had never been able to read what those letters said. She had spent years recognizing his handwriting on documents without being able to access it. She spread the page open on her knee. She looked at it. She had read 14 pages aloud the night before without stopping. She had read his mother's words back to Caleb in the lamplight. She had read grain orders and supply lists and 2 chapters of a novel about a woman crossing the plains alone. She had come further in 2 months than she had thought possible in 2 years. But this was her father's hand. This was not a novel or a supply ledger or someone else's mother's journal. This was her father writing to her from a distance of 2 years and the permanent country of the dead, and she had absolutely no idea what he had wanted to say. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat on the page. She looked at the first word. Emma. She knew that word. She would know that word in any hand, in any light, in any version of any language. She had written it herself 4 times on a piece of paper she still carried. Emma. She looked at the next word. If. She knew that one too. 2 letters. Simple. If. She went slower than she had ever gone. Slower than her first lesson. Slower than the night she'd read Barn and Home, and felt something unlock in her chest. She went word by word sometimes, letter by letter. Sometimes stopping for a full minute on a single word. Pressing her memory for every rule Caleb had taught her, testing each sound against what she knew. It took her a long time. When she finished, she sat with the page on her knee and looked at the far wall of her small room and breathed. Her father had written Emma. If you are reading this yourself, then you found what I always believed was in you. I failed you by not teaching you sooner. Not the world, not your brothers, me. I had the time, and I spent it on other things, and I have regretted it since before you were grown. You are not what they said. You never were. I am proud of you. I was always proud of you. Your father, Thomas. She sat there for a long time. The morning light moved across the floor. She heard Caleb come out of the barn. She heard him cross the yard to the cookhouse and stop at the door and probably understand that she wasn't in there and make his own coffee, which she had seen him do before, on mornings when she was slow getting up. She heard the ordinary sounds of the ranch doing what the ranch did, the animals and the wind and the machinery of a day, starting without her. She sat on the edge of her bed and held her father's letter and cried, not the way. She didn't cry quietly, carefully, with the practiced containment of a woman who had learned to manage herself in front of other people. She cried the way she cried when she was entirely alone, which was the only time she ever allowed it. Fully. Without management. The 26 years of it, and her father's voice in it, and the thing she had been too ashamed to want, and then wanted anyway, and was now page by painstaking page becoming. She cried until she was done. Then she folded the letter carefully, put it back in its envelope, and put the envelope in her dress pocket, alongside the paper with her name on it. She washed her face. She went to start the day. Caleb was at the cookhouse table with his own coffee when she came in, and he looked at her face with those creekwater eyes, and saw everything she had not managed to fully erase. He said nothing. He got up and poured her a cup and set it in front of her chair and sat back down. She sat down. They drank their coffee in the kind of silence that is not empty. After a while, Emma said, "My father wrote me a letter." Caleb looked up. "Before he died," she said. "I've been carrying it for 2 years." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "I read it this morning." He was very still. "By myself," she said. "It took me a long time, but I read it." The cookhouse was quiet. "He said he was proud of me," Emma said. Her voice was steady. She had decided it would be steady, and it was. "He said he'd always been proud of me." Caleb set his cup down. "Emma." "I know," she said. "I know what you're going to say." "I don't think you do." She looked at him. "I was going to say," he said carefully, "that he was right." She pressed her lips together. "He was right," Caleb said again, with the quiet certainty he gave to true things. "And I'm glad you got to hear it, even if it took 2 years." Emma looked at her coffee. "I thought about not telling you," she said. "It's a private thing." "It is," he agreed. "But you were the one who taught me how to read it," she said. It seemed like you should know that it mattered, that it was worth something what you did." He was quiet for a moment. "What I did was sit in a chair and talk about letters," he said. "What you did was learn them." "Don't do that," she said, not unkindly. "Do what? Make it smaller than it was." He picked up his cup. "All right," he said. "I won't." They finished their coffee, and the day began. What Emma did not tell Caleb, what she turned over in her own mind through the rest of that Wednesday and into the week that followed, was the other thing in the letter. The thing after "I am proud of you." Her father had also written, "There is land." Not much. 40 acres outside Harlow Creek up in the Montana Valley. Registered in your name since 1875. Your Uncle Garrett has been holding the deed. He will give it over when asked. I meant to tell you sooner. I meant to do a great many things sooner. Emma had read that part 4 times to make sure she had it right. 40 acres. In her name. Registered in 1875. 3 years ago, while she was still in Missouri, while she was still working other people's farms and boarding houses and kitchens, while she was still believing that the only thing she owned in the world was the wooden suitcase and the thimble in the tin and the letter she couldn't read. She had land. She sat with this information, the way she sat with anything that had the potential to rearrange her life carefully from multiple angles, not rushing to conclusions before she had examined the thing fully. It was land near Harlow Creek, which was 8 miles from the Dawson Ranch, which meant it was 8 miles from here, which meant she had been within 8 miles of her own land since the day she arrived. The irony of that was so complete she almost laughed. Almost. She needed to know more before she could decide what to do with this. She needed to find her Uncle Garrett, who she hadn't seen in 4 years and who had apparently been holding a deed with her name on it without finding a way to tell her. She needed to understand the condition of the land. She needed to know what 40 acres in this valley was worth and what it could do. She realized, to write a letter. And she had never written a letter in her life. She asked Caleb on a Thursday evening after the reading and before the lesson, while he was marking a passage in the novel, and she was sitting across from him working up to it. "I need to write a letter," she said. He looked up. "To my Uncle Garrett," she said. "I found out there's something I need to clarify with him. About family business." He set the book down. "You want help writing it?" "I want to write it myself," she said. "But I don't know if I can yet. Not something that has to be official. Something that has to say the right things correctly." He was quiet for a moment, reading her face. "How much do you want me involved?" "I want to write it," she said. "I want every word to be mine. But I want you to—" She paused. "I want you to sit there while I do it, in case I get stuck on something I can't work out." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's how I used to do my accounts," he said, "when I first started running this ranch alone. My father's ranch hand at the time would sit at the table while I did the books. Didn't help unless I asked. Just sat there." "Did it help?" "Considerably," he said. He got paper and a pencil and put them in front of her. And Emma Whitaker, who had never written more than her own name, began to write a letter. It took a long time. She stopped on words and worked them out. She wrote lines and crossed them out and wrote them again better. Caleb sat across from her and read his own book and looked up exactly twice, once when she said, "How do you spell received?" and he told her, and once when she looked up at him with an expression that was both frustrated and fiercely determined, and he said simply, "You're doing it," and she said, "I know, be quiet," and went back to the page. When she finished, she set down the pencil. She read the letter back to herself. Then she slid it across the table to him without a word. He read it. She watched his face. When he was done, he looked up at her, and his expression was the same one he'd worn when she read 14 pages without stopping, the one she had no defenses prepared for. "It's good," he said. "It says exactly what you need it to say." "Are there errors?" "2 spelling mistakes," he said. "Small ones. Do you want to correct them?" "Yes," she said, immediately. He pointed them out. She made the corrections in her careful, not yet fluent handwriting. Then she folded the letter and found an envelope and addressed it slowly, precisely, the letters forming under her hand with the deliberateness of something that mattered to Mr. Garrett Whitaker, Harlow Creek, Montana Territory. She set it on the table. "I'll take it to town tomorrow," Caleb said. "I'll take it myself," she said. "When you go to town next week, I'll come." He looked at her. "I want to post it myself," she said. Is that a strange thing to want?" "No," he said, and the way he said it, immediate, certain, as if the question barely required the effort of answering, told her more than any elaborate explanation would have. She picked up the envelope and held it for a moment. She thought about 40 acres 8 miles east. She thought about her father's handwriting on a page she had carried for 2 years. She thought about the word precarious, and the word home, and the word safe, all of which she had read with her own eyes in the last month. She thought that whatever came next, and she didn't know yet what would come next, didn't know what 40 acres meant for the life she was building, or the man she was building it near, or the thing that neither of them had named that lived in the space between them. Every evening at the lamplit table, whatever came next, she was going to face it reading. "Caleb," she said. "Emma, thank you," she said, "for all of it. I know I said don't thank me for standing beside you, but this for the letters and the patience and the sitting there while I figured things out. Thank you." He was quiet for a moment. "Emma," he said in the voice he used when he was going to say a true thing, "you know the reason I sat there." She looked at him. She did know. She had known for a while. Neither of them had said it yet, and she was not going to say it tonight, because some things needed to arrive at their own pace, and she had learned better than anyone what it cost to rush toward something before you were ready and the ground was solid. "I know," she said. He held her gaze. "Same time tomorrow," she said. "Same time tomorrow," he said. She put the letter in her pocket and walked out into the September night. Her Uncle Garrett's reply arrived 16 days later. Emma was in the cookhouse when Caleb came in from town with the mail, and she knew immediately from the way he set the stack on the table, specifically from the way he set one envelope slightly apart from the others, that it had come. She picked it up. Her name was on the front. Her uncle's return address was on the back. She opened it at the cookhouse table standing up and read it without sitting down, which told her something about the state of herself. It took her approximately 4 minutes to read through the full letter, which was longer than she'd expected, and written in her uncle's characteristically unpunctuated style, which made it grammatically challenging, but emotionally very clear. She read it twice. Then she sat down. Caleb was very carefully not watching her from where he stood near the door, which meant he was extremely aware of her from where he stood near the door. "The land is real," she said. He turned. 42 acres, not 40. He says my father miscounted, which is typical." She set the letter on the table. "He's been grazing a neighbor's cattle on it, which my father apparently arranged as a temporary measure that has become, in my uncle's words, somewhat longer than temporary. The neighbor has been paying him a grazing fee." She looked up. "Which my uncle has been keeping." Caleb went still in a specific way. "How long?" he said. 3 years, she said. She watched the very controlled way Caleb Dawson processed that information, the slight set of his jaw, the careful stillness of his hands, the overall impression of a man who had strong feelings about certain kinds of dishonesty and was exercising significant restraint in their presence. "Emma," he said. "That's why money he owes me," she said. "Yes." "A significant amount of money over 3 years." "Yes." "Are you—" He stopped, composed himself. "What are you going to do?" Emma looked at the letter. She had been asking herself that question since the third sentence. The land was real. It was hers. It was 8 miles east of where she was sitting right now in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana, and it had been hers for 3 years while she worked boarding houses and ranch kitchens and carried a suitcase and a secret and a letter she couldn't read. The grazing money was a different matter. She would deal with her uncle directly on that point. In a follow-up letter, she already knew exactly what she wanted to say. But the land, 42 acres, hers. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I need to see it first." "I'll take you," he said immediately. She looked at him. "To see the land," he said. "I know that valley east of Harlow Creek. I can take you out there so you can see what you're working with. You don't have to, Emma." She stopped. "I know I don't have to," he said with a quiet emphasis that was not impatience and not frustration, but was something adjacent to both of them. Something closer to a man who has been holding something back for long enough that it is becoming difficult. "I want to." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what Hector had said in the cookhouse doorway in August. "You're good for him," and the 2 hours she had spent refusing to let it rearrange anything before giving that up as a failed project. She thought about her father's letter in her pocket. "I was always proud of you." She thought about the name she had written 4 times on a piece of paper and carried through the whole summer. "Saturday," she said. "We can go Saturday." He nodded. Saturday. She picked up her uncle's letter and folded it carefully. Then she reached into her pocket and took out the piece of paper with her name on it. The one from the very first lesson. The one that was worn soft now from 2 months of being carried, and she set it on the table beside the letter from her uncle. 2 pieces of paper. One was the first thing she had ever written. One was the thing she had been waiting 2 years to read. She looked at both of them. Then she looked at Caleb Dawson standing across the cookhouse with his hat in his hands and his careful eyes and his mother's books, and the particular patience of a man who had been alone a long time and had found without planning to find it something worth being patient for. "You should know something," she said. "All right," he said. "When I first came here," she said, "I had a plan. Work a season, save enough to move on, find the next place. I've always had the next place." She looked at the 2 papers. "I don't currently have a next place." He was very still. "I don't know what that means yet," she said. I'm not making a declaration. I'm just telling you the truth of where I am, because you've told me the truth of where you are, and that seemed like something I owed you back." Caleb set his hat on the table. He looked at her with the eyes that reminded her of creek water in the shade, dark and still, and holding more than they let show on the surface. "I'm glad you don't have a next place," he said. Emma looked at him. "I've been glad about that," he said, "for a while now." The cookhouse was quiet. The September light moved through it, warm and amber, and full of all the things that had been building since July. All the evenings at the lamp, and the letters learned, and the pages read, and the laughter surprised out of him, and the way he had stood beside her, not in front of her in Clara Whitmore's yard, and in everything that came after. Emma picked up both pieces of paper and put them back in her pocket. "Saturday," she said. "Show me my land." "Saturday," he said, and it was a promise. Saturday arrived, the way important days tend to arrive quietly, without announcement, wearing the same clothes as any other day, so you almost miss that. It's different until you're already inside it. Emma was up before dawn. She told herself it was habit. She had been up before dawn every day since Missouri. Since long before Missouri. Since the first morning, she understood that the early hours belonged to people who needed the extra time more than they needed the sleep. She told herself it was habit, and she believed it for approximately 10 minutes before she admitted to no one but the dark ceiling of her small room that she was nervous. She was not a woman who got nervous. She got practical. She got prepared. She got precise and methodical, and she handled things by handling them. Nervousness was the indulgence of people who had the luxury of not acting, and Emma had never had that luxury. But this was her land. 42 acres, with her name on a deed that her father had registered 3 years ago in a valley 8 miles east, and today she was going to stand on it for the first time, and it was going to be real. In a way, it hadn't been real yet even after the letter, even after reading the letter herself with her own eyes. Real in the body, real under her feet, real the way only the physical world can make things real. She got up. She started the fire. She had biscuits in the pan and coffee on before the sky had done more than suggest light at its edges. And when Caleb came in from the barn at his usual time and stopped in the doorway and looked at her, she met his eyes and said, "Don't say anything." He sat down. "I wasn't going to." "Good. You've been up a while," he observed. "Don't say anything," she repeated. The shadow of a smile. "Yes, ma'am." She put a plate in front of him and sat down across the table with her own coffee, and they ate in the comfortable silence that had become over the course of a summer one of her favorite things in the world. Not the silence of two people with nothing to say. The silence of two people who had said enough that the quiet between them had weight and warmth and didn't require filling. When he finished, he pushed back his plate and said, "Ready when you are." She stood up. "I've been ready since 4 in the morning," she said. "Let's go." The ride took a little under an hour. They talked some and were quiet some, and the quiet was as good as the talking, which had become the reliable standard by which Emma measured the quality of any company. She had been in too much forced conversation in her life, the social performance of someone who had to keep people comfortable enough not to look too closely. What she had with Caleb required no performance. She told him about her Uncle Garrett during the ride. Not the full history. She was not a woman who gave the full history of anything until she trusted both the person and the moment, but the relevant parts. Her father's young brother, decent in a general way, but not a man who let decency inconvenience him. The grazing fee accumulated over 3 years. "I wrote him back," she said. "Last night." Caleb glanced at her. "What did you say?" "I said I expected a full accounting of the fees collected, that I would be visiting the land in the coming weeks, and that I expected the matter to be resolved before winter." A pause. "How did it sound?" "It sounded," Emma said, "like a woman who knows what's hers." Caleb nodded once. "Good. I also said that I bore him no ill will provided the accounting was accurate and complete, because he is family, and I don't discard family lightly." "Also good," Caleb said, "and I told him to write back promptly because I was a busy woman and didn't intend to wait indefinitely." She paused. "I may have enjoyed writing that part slightly more than was strictly necessary." Caleb laughed, the one, full and unguarded, the one that showed the lines beside his eyes and made him look like the man he was underneath the careful control. She had made him laugh that way a dozen times now, and it still caught her somewhere undefended every single time. "You have a gift for letters," he said when he'd recovered. "I've had 2 months of practice," she said. 2 months, he said. "Most people don't accomplish in 2 months what you've done." She looked at the road ahead. "Most people started at 7, she said. "I had 26 years of paying attention instead of reading. I just had to learn to put the two together." He was quiet for a moment. "I never thought of it that way." "Most people don't," she said. Not bitterly, just accurately. He pulled the horses to a slower pace, and she understood without being told that they were getting close. She felt it before he said anything. There was a specific quality to the land when it was yours. She had heard people talk about that and dismissed it as sentiment, the kind of thing people said because it sounded meaningful. She was not a sentimental woman. She dealt in what was real and provable, and she had little patience for mysticism. But when the wagon came up over a low rise and Caleb said, "That's it from that stand of cottonwoods east to the creek north to the ridge," She felt something move through her that she couldn't name with any of the practical vocabulary she preferred. Something settled. Something that had been held at tension for so long, she'd stopped noticing the tension. The way you stop noticing a sound that's been there long enough, settled into its right position. She stepped down from the wagon before it had fully stopped, which was not her usual way, and walked forward. The ground was dry and grass-covered and slightly uneven in the way of land that has been grazed but not broken. She could feel the quality of it through her boots, good soil not depleted, not rocky. Her father had chosen well. For a man who couldn't calculate acreage correctly, he had chosen very well. She stopped in the middle of it and stood still. Behind her she heard Caleb step down from the wagon. He didn't follow her. He stayed by the horses and gave her the space, which was the right thing to do, and she had known he would do it because she had been learning to read him the same way she had learned to read everything else carefully, attentively, with the total investment of someone who understood that what you learn about a person matters more than what you learn from a book. She stood on her land and thought about her father, Thomas Whitaker, who had been poor and hard-working and had failed her in one specific significant way and had known it and had written her a letter about it before he died. Who had registered 42 acres in her name in 1875, with what money she didn't know, she would probably never know, and had meant to tell her and hadn't, and had carried that too in his own way in the last years of his life. She thought that grief was strange in its economy. How much it cost to hold, and how little that cost diminished it. She pulled both pieces of paper from her pocket. The one with her name on it worn soft from a summer of carrying. The letter from her father crisper, more recently read, but already taking on the texture of something handled with care. She held them in the same hand. She looked at this land. "Papa," she said quietly to no one, and to him, to the air and the grass and the 42 acres that were the last tangible evidence of his intentions toward her. "I read your letter." The wind moved. She pressed her lips together hard. "I read it myself," she said. She stood there another minute. Then she turned around and walked back to the wagon where Caleb was waiting with the kind of patience that had nothing performed in it. Just the genuine article, and she said, "Tell me what you think, honestly. What's it worth? What could be done with it?" He looked at the land with a rancher's eye, assessing practical, the same look he turned on animals and equipment and supply calculations. She appreciated that he didn't soften it for her. "The soil's decent," he said. "It's been grazed but not overworked. The creek access on the east edge is valuable. Water rights in this valley are worth as much as the land itself, sometimes more." He paused. "You could run cattle on it. Not a large operation, not to start, but a real one. Or you could lease it, proper lease, documented and fair, and take the income while you decide what you want to do with it long term." Emma listened to all of it. "What would you do?" she asked. "If it were yours?" He thought about that with the seriousness the question deserved. "I'd build on it," he said. "This valley's going to keep growing. Land with water access near Harlow Creek 15 years from now is going to be worth considerably more than it is today." He met her eyes. "I'd build something on it and stay." She held his gaze. "That's what I thought," she said. They were on the road back to the ranch, the late morning warming around them, when the thing that had been building since July finally arrived. Not dramatically. Not with any of the theatrical weight that books, even the ones she had come to love, tended to assign to significant moments. It arrived the way the September air had arrived at the edges of the summer, the way all changing seasons arrive present, and already happening, and inevitable. Emma said, "I've been thinking about something." "All right," Caleb said. "If I build on that land," she said, "it'll take time. Planning resources, the kind of sustained effort that's difficult to manage alone, especially in the first winter." "It would," he agreed carefully. "I'm not asking for help," she said immediately. "I know you're not. I'm stating a practical reality." "Yes, and the practical reality is that 42 acres 8 miles east of a ranch I've been managing for 3 months is a situation that has a natural—" She stopped, chose her words with the same care she now chose words on a page, understanding that they did specific work, and the wrong ones did wrong work. A natural logic to it, she finished. That I'm not going to pretend isn't there just because it's inconvenient to say aloud. Caleb had gone very still beside her. Emma, he said, I'm not finished. He closed his mouth. I came here with nothing but a suitcase and a secret, she said. I'm leaving. I'm not leaving. I'm not saying I'm leaving. I'm saying that what I came with and what I have now are so different that sometimes I can't entirely account for how I got from one to the other. She looked at the road. And most of that accounting leads back to you, which I am aware of, which I have been aware of for some time. She stopped. He waited. She had prepared more to say, and found now that she was here that it was unnecessary. She had said the essential things. The rest was the kind of elaboration she had never had patience for, and she wasn't going to develop patience for it now. She looked at him. I was looking at her with an expression she had been not looking at for 2 months, because looking at it directly required accepting what it meant, and accepting what it meant required the kind of courage that she applied to everything, except it turned out this. Well, she said. Well, he said, I have also been aware of certain things for some time. Such as the fact that this ranch has not been quiet since July, he said, and I did not understand until recently how much I had missed the sound. She looked at him. Such as the fact that I have read more in the last 2 months than in the 2 years before, he said, because I have had reason to. Caleb. Such as the fact that I have been trying to find the right moment to say something for approximately 6 weeks, and the right moment keeps... He stopped. The horses moved steadily under his hands. Keeps being every moment, which makes it difficult to choose one. Emma felt her mouth do something she didn't fully authorize. 6 weeks, she said. At least, he said. You are a very patient man, she said. I have been told, he said with perfect gravity, that I am. She laughed, not the careful, contained kind she used in social situations. The real one, the one that came from somewhere below, the deliberate self, the same laugh that had escaped her the first time she'd been surprised by something in one of his books, and she'd felt him look up with that particular pleased expression. She laughed, and he looked at her with that expression now, and the wagon moved through the September morning, and the land she owned was 8 miles behind her, and the land he owned was 8 miles ahead, and the distance between both of those things was she was beginning to understand the distance of a conversation they were in the middle of having. I'm not easy, she said when she'd recovered. I know. I have strong opinions about the English language, and most of them are unfavorable. I've noticed. I write letters that make my uncle uncomfortable, and I intend to keep doing it. Good, he said. And I have 42 acres that I am going to build something on, she said. That is not a hypothetical. That is a plan. I know, he said. I'd like to help with it if you'll let me. I'll let you, she said. Within reason. What's the reason? I'll tell you when we exceed it. He nodded slowly with the particular nod she had come to understand, meant he was not simply agreeing, but actually absorbing something, actually taking it in. That's fair, he said. Caleb, she said. Emma. Say the thing, she said. The thing you've been trying to find the right moment for 6 weeks. Say it now. This is the moment. He looked at the road ahead. She waited. He said, I would like you to stay. She let that land. Not as my household manager, he said. Not as an employee, or a practical arrangement, or any of the things it's been perfectly reasonable for both of us to call it until now. He paused. I would like you to stay, because this ranch has your sound in it, and I don't want it to go quiet again. Because you read my mother's words back to me in her own house, and that is not something I will forget as long as I live. Because... He stopped. Because I have been alone in this valley for a long time. Emma and I did not mind it until you arrived, and now I mind it considerably. The wagon moved. The morning was warm and clear, and full of the smell of changing seasons. Emma looked at the road ahead and thought about every version of herself that had led to this wagon, this road, this man beside her. The 7-year-old whose mother got sick. The 12-year-old who kept working instead of going to school. the 26-year-old who had arrived at a ranch in the Bitterroot Valley with a suitcase and a secret and a letter she couldn't read. She thought about barn and home and the first page she ever read alone, and her father's voice on a piece of paper she had carried for 2 years. She thought about standing on her own land an hour ago and saying, "I read it myself." She thought about what it meant that she had arrived here with nothing and was leaving, was staying, was choosing with something she had not expected and could not have planned for and did not, when she looked at it directly, want to live without. "All right," she said. He looked at her. "All right," she said again more clearly. "I'll stay." His hands on the reins went fractionally less tense in the way of a man who has been holding something at careful suspension and has finally been given permission to put it down. "You're sure?" he said. "Caleb," she said patiently. "Yes." "Do I strike you as a woman who says things she's not sure of?" "No," he said. "You do not." "Then take me at my word." "Yes, ma'am," he said. She looked at him sideways. "And don't call me ma'am." "Emma," he corrected. "Better," she said. What followed was not simple. Emma had not expected simple and would have been suspicious of it if it arrived. There was her Uncle Garrett, who replied to her second letter with an accounting that was as she had suspected, not entirely accurate, and required 2 more letters and 1 direct visit. She and Caleb rode to Harlow Creek on a Thursday in October before the matter of the grazing fees was resolved to her satisfaction. Her uncle, when confronted in person with Emma's written documentation and the precise arithmetic she had done in her head and then put on paper for the first time in her life, had the decency to look genuinely ashamed. "Your father," he said, "would be very, you've changed, Emma." "No," she said. "I've just been able to say more of what was already there." She left with a banker's draft and a deed transfer that she read herself, word by word, at the lawyer's desk in Harlow Creek, while Caleb sat in a chair against the wall and did not say a single thing, and she understood that his silence was one of the finest things anyone had ever given her. She folded the deed and put it in her pocket beside the paper with her name on it. There was the land itself, what to do with it, how to manage it, the practical work of turning 42 owned acres into 42 productive ones. She and Caleb spent long evenings at the table working through it, but not the way they used to work through the reading lessons. Differently. As 2 people who had declared their intentions and were now engaged in the serious business of working out the details of a shared life, which was harder and more interesting and more real than anything that had come before. She was going to keep a small operation on her land. Caleb would help her set up the initial structure. They were neighbors legally. In practice, the distance between the 2 properties was increasingly theoretical. Clara Whitmore came by in October and found Emma at the table in the ranch cabin, her chair, her side of the table. Caleb's mother's journal open in front of her, and stood in the doorway with the particular expression of a woman revising a conclusion she had drawn too quickly. "You're reading Margaret's journals," Clara said. "I am," Emma said. She did not close the journal or move from the chair. Clara looked at her for a long moment. "She wrote in those for 30 years, she said. "I used to wonder who would read them." "Now you know," Emma said. Clara came in and sat down, and they had the first of what turned out to be several real conversations. Not the careful social performances of a gathering, but actual exchanges between 2 women who had each been underestimated in their own ways and had each, through different routes, arrived at a place of not tolerating it anymore. "I should have known better," Clara said during the second conversation, referring without naming it to the afternoon with the letter. "My own mother couldn't write her name." Emma looked at her. "Is that true?" "Signed everything with an X." Clara's voice was even. "Ran 300 acres from 1842 to 1859, couldn't read a word on any of the contracts, memorized everything. Never once got cheated because she was smarter than every man who ever tried." Emma sat with that. "You should have led with that," she said. Clara laughed, a real one, surprised, the kind that changed her face, the same way laughter changed everyone's face when it was genuine. "Yes," she said. "I should have." On the 1st of November, Emma read to children for the first time. It was not planned. It happened because Hector's youngest daughter, 6 years old, Gap-toothed, relentlessly curious, had come to the ranch with her father one afternoon and found Emma at the cabin table with one of the simpler books from Caleb's shelf, and had climbed into the adjacent chair without asking permission and said, "What's that say?" Emma had looked at her. She had looked at the book. She had looked at the girl. "Come here," she said. "I'll show you." She read to the girl for 40 minutes. She didn't read smoothly. She was still working on smoothly. Still had words that required effort. Still found certain combinations that required her to stop and work them out. But she read, and the girl listened, and when Hector came to collect his daughter, the girl looked at him with enormous eyes and said, "Papa, Miss Emma can read, and she says I can learn too." Hector looked at Emma over his daughter's head. His expression was the same one she had learned to recognize in various forms over the last months, the one that was trying not to show how much something had landed. "Can she?" he said. "Anyone can," Emma said, given time and someone patient enough to sit there. She looked at Caleb across the room. He was looking back at her with the expression she had finally stopped having no defenses against, because she had decided to simply let it in rather than defend against it, which had turned out to be easier and considerably better. She looked at Hector's daughter. "Same time next week," she said. "We'll start with A." The girl nodded so hard, her whole head moved. On a Sunday evening in the second week of November, when the valley had gone fully into autumn and the air had the cold clarity that comes before the first real snow, Emma picked up one of Caleb's mother's books, not the journal, a novel, the one with the green cover that he had first read to her on a summer evening in July, and she sat down in her chair by the lamp and she opened it to the first page. Caleb was across the table working through some ranch accounts, his head bent over the ledger. He hadn't heard her pick up the book. He was doing the math and the writing simultaneously, which was a thing he did that she had watched and quietly admired since August. The casual and complete mastery of the written world that she had been working toward one word at a time. She looked at the first page. She read the first line to herself. Then she said, "Caleb." He looked up. She held the book so he could see what she was holding. His expression did the thing she loved. Shifted. Arrived somewhere he hadn't expected. "Read to me," she said. "The way you did in July. I want to hear it the way I heard it then." He set down his pencil. "And then," she said, "I'll read the next chapter myself." He looked at her across the lamp. The fire was going in the stove. Outside, the first real breath of winter was pressing at the windows. Inside, the cabin had the warm weight of a house that had been empty too long and had found without quite planning to the sound it had been missing. Caleb picked up the book. He opened it to the first page. He began to read. His voice filled the cabin the way it had filled it on that first evening, low and steady and warm, carrying the words into the room, the way someone carries something precious with attention and care and the ease of long familiarity. She listened the way she had listened then, except that now she could follow the words on the page as he spoke them, could feel each one land twice in her ears and in her eyes simultaneously. And the doubling of it was something she had not expected and could not have prepared for. When he finished the chapter, he closed the book and held it out to her. She took it. She found the next chapter. Her voice was not his voice. It was lower, more deliberate, still working at smoothness, still with the occasional pause over a word that required an extra second. But it was her voice. Her own voice carrying someone else's words out of the marks on a page and into the air of the room, doing the thing she had watched other people do her whole life and had believed for most of those years was simply not available to her. She read to him. She read the whole chapter. When she finished, she closed the book and set it on the table between them. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Caleb said quietly, "There's a word you missed in the fourth paragraph." She looked at him. "Luminous," he said. "You said luminous." "Luminous," she repeated, correcting it. "Means full of light," he said. "Glowing." She looked at the closed book on the table. Then she looked at this cabin, at the lamp between them, at Caleb's mother's books on the shelf at the ledger, with his careful writing at the chair she had been sitting in since July, at the man across from her who had said, "Is that all?" when she handed him her worst fear, and had not let go of it since. She thought about 26 years of being locked outside. She thought about the first time she wrote her name, about her father's letter, about 42 acres with her name on the deed 8 miles east waiting for spring, about Hector's daughter saying, "Miss Emma can read," about Clara Whitmore's mother signing everything with an X and running 300 acres for 17 years. She thought about barn and home and luminous. She thought about what it meant to have been locked out of something for your whole life, and then to find, not that someone unlocked it for you, but that you found the handle yourself and the door had been yours the whole time. Luminous, she said again, tasting the word. Yes, Caleb said. She looked at him. That's a good word, she said. It is, he said. She reached across the table and opened the book to the page with the 4th paragraph. She found the word. She read it in context, and then she read the whole sentence, and then she read the paragraph, and it was slow and not perfect and entirely hers. And when she finished, she looked up at Caleb Dawson in the lamplight of a Montana November, and she understood with the complete and settled certainty she gave to true things that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because someone had brought her here, not because she had been rescued or saved or carried over any threshold she couldn't cross herself, but because she had arrived through hard work and hard years, and 1 summer's worth of courage, and 1 man's worth of patience, at the life she had always been capable of living. She had simply needed the time, and someone patient enough to sit there. The lamp burned between them. The winter pressed warm at the windows, and Emma Whitaker, who had once stood in a ranch kitchen with a letter she couldn't read and a secret she'd been protecting for 26 years, sat in the house that had become her home and read. She read, and the words were hers, and the door was open, and she was never going back through it the same way again.